My name is Ethan Cottingham, and I'm a mechanical engineer at Power Engineering and Manufacturing. Today I'm here to introduce you to the Direct Connect wireless remote control electronic towing system. And today we're going to be demonstrating how to install that onto your truck. The first thing we're going to do is review the parts that we'll be using for today's installation. Here I have a full kit which includes an actuator which will be attached directly to the hydraulic linkage, the kit bag that comes with every actuator. Actuators can be attached to all other tow functions, and the installation procedure will be the same as we are demonstrating today. Each additional actuator will come with a parts kit to make that possible. Additionally, the kit comes with a handheld device which will be electronically synchronized directly to each and every actuator put onto the truck. Also included is the system parts kit consisting of a metal pivot rod, mounting brackets, and hardware to make the installation possible. The first thing we need to do is install the two mounting tabs to the side of the control station. And for this, we're going to need to drill 4 5/8" holes. Before we start though, it's important to roughly lay out where we want the actuator to be placed and to make sure that we have enough room for the actuator before we drill the holes. We're looking to make sure that we have approximately 17 inches of free space for the actuator. We would like to put the pivot rod as close to the levers as possible, and we're just making sure that we have enough room for the full actuator and the bracket. We're going to place the mounting tabs as close to the end of the control station on the passenger side of the vehicle as we can. To mark our drill points on the control station, we're going to make sure that center of the pivot rod is 2 inches from the linkages themselves. We will mark one of the mounting tabs, drill the holes, and tighten the bracket down. Once that bracket is installed, find a reference point to measure from. The mounting tabs will be placed directly across from one another, where the center of the pivot rod will be 2 inches from the linkage assembly. This is ensuring that the pivot rod is straight. Once we drill the holes, we can assemble the mounting tabs to the control station using the carriage bolts, lock washers, and nuts. It is absolutely imperative that these are tight, and we highly recommend torquing these to 30 foot-pounds. Again, inspect that the pivot rod is straight with the linkage assembly. Then, place one of the retaining rings on the outside hole of the mounting tabs to secure the pivot rod. Also, make sure that when you put the retaining ring on the pivot rod, you leave room for the retaining ring securing the pivot rod on the other side. And now we're ready for the next step. Next, we're going to install the C bracket, and we will need the following parts: the C bracket itself, 2 U-bolts, lock washers, and nuts, and the hardware for the actuator, which includes the clevis, pin, and plastic washers. First, you will loosely attach the C bracket to the desired linkage with the opening of the C bracket facing the pivot rod. When it's loosely attached, you're able to slide it on the linkage. You are to measure 16 3/4 inches from the center of the pivot rod to the back side of the C bracket. The actuator push rod is variable, which provides the installer a lot of safety, but measuring 16 3/4 inches gets us close to the center of the actuator's travel. Tighten the 4 U-bolts with the lock washers, ensuring that the bracket is straight, meaning that the bracket is vertical when it's hanging off of the linkage. Make sure that the U-bolts are tightened evenly. It is absolutely imperative that these also cannot move. We recommend torquing these nuts to 5 foot-pounds. Again, I will emphasize, it is absolutely imperative that the C bracket cannot move on the linkage. The next step is to attach some of the hardware to the actuator push rod. For this, we will need the following hardware, which is found in the actuator box: a jam nut, clevis, and the plastic washers. Thread the jam nut onto the actuator push rod, followed by the clevis. Ensure that the jam nut is all the way down and you have full thread engagement on the clevis. Secure the jam nut to make sure that it's nice and tight. The actuator is now ready to be installed onto the pivot rod. Slide the pivot rod out of the mounting tabs just enough to where you can install the actuator. The actuator should be oriented in a way to where the wires are facing the ground, meaning that the logo is upside down. The next step is to make sure that the clevis is properly aligned. Manually extend the push rod to align the clevis with the C bracket. Again, check that the push rod is near the center of its stroke, and adjust the push rod as necessary to get it close to the center of its stroke. When the clevis is aligned with the C-bracket, install the plastic washers between the C-bracket and the clevis to prevent corrosion and install the pin. The final step of the installation is to wire the actuator, or actuators if you are installing multiple. There are some important considerations to take into account when you're performing this step. The first is to note that red must be connected to power and black must be connected to ground. Reversing polarity anywhere in the actuator will result in the actuator not powering on or operating correctly. Secondly, the actuator accepts either 12 volt or 24 volt source, and it can be wired directly to the battery or downstream of the power on relays. Thirdly, the wire gauge is to be determined by the installer depending on the length required to reach the power source. PEM recommends using 18 gauge wire and provides the connector along with 2 feet of wire to splice into the common power source. Finally, and potentially the most important consideration, the actuators should have a single 10 amp fuse spliced into the red power wire. This is true whether or not there is a single actuator being used or up to 6 actuators. There needs to be a 10 amp fuse spliced into the common power wire. PEM recommends putting the fuse in an accessible location that is not exposed to the element. The reason we use a 10 amp fuse is in the event the operator actuates 2 functions at the same time. Additionally, the reason for the 10 amp fuse is that without conditions such as rust, ice, snow buildup, or sticky valve, the actuator typically draws 2 or 3 amps. However, when these conditions do exist, the actuator can power up to 100 pounds of force to break through the buildup, and it can draw up to 5 amps, which results in the need for the 10 amp fuse. To improve your tow operation, visit Power Engineering and Manufacturing's website. Send us an email or give us a call, and we'll get you in touch with an authorized Direct Connect dealer. For more information on Direct Connect, be sure to check out our other videos on PEM's Direct Connect channel. Thanks for watching.